Hello again, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Joint Industry Outreach Seminar. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, my name is Daniel Johnson, and I work for the U.S. Department of Energy's International Non-Proliferation Export Control Program, and I am the facilitator for the event. On day 1, we had a great start to the seminar with over 900 unique visitors, and I see we're up over 450 currently and climbing. So it's very exciting to see this level of enthusiasm for this event, and I hope the crowd continues to grow today. Let me give a quick recap of day 1 to start. We started by taking a deep dive into major strategic trade control issues with some high-level speakers who encouraged us to continue with like-minded cooperation between government and industry to secure international trade, control key technologies, and to harmonize export control systems between countries. Our first panel yesterday focused on some of the major export control challenges that the United States is working on, including sanctions regimes, the military end user list, and emerging technology, amongst a number of other issues. The second panel looked at cyber and supply chain risk, protecting information, and how to respond when you have lost or compromised data. And our third panel explored export control regulatory developments in Japan, Germany, the Netherlands, and South Korea. So we received a global overview of the latest developments in strategic trade controls. Today, we're going to pick up where we left off and explore regulatory developments in Southeast Asia, further interrogate supply chain risks, and examine intangible technology transfer, IPR, and similar issues. So many of the questions yesterday related to these topics. So I think we'll have a very robust discussion today, and I strongly encourage you to ask lots of questions. I'm going to keep the rest of the introduction a bit shorter today, so we have more time for presentations and discussions. So let's get right into it. Next slide, please. Let me briefly repeat a few housekeeping items from yesterday. So all of the attendees are muted because of the size of the audience. So questions must be submitted through the Q&A box, which we'll review again in a moment. And as like yesterday, this seminar is being recorded and all discussions are being held at the unclassified level. Next slide. So please submit your questions to moderators and panelists through the Q&A function on the lower right corner of WebEx. Yesterday, we had a number of questions that we didn't have time to answer during the panels, but we have assigned team members to respond to you directly in the Q&A box. I know a few slipped through the cracks, so we'll follow up by email if we don't hear back. We'll do that again today, so hopefully you'll get a response one way or another. We didn't seem to have any significant technical difficulties on day 1, so hopefully that continues, but if you do encounter a problem, please let us know through that Q&A box, and we'll see if there's something we can do to help. Next slide. And again, to reiterate from yesterday, for optimal viewing, we suggest selecting 2 options from the layout menu. You can choose the side-by-side view, and also uncheck the show participants without video. So this will unclutter your screen and help to focus in on the presentations and speakers. Next slide. So let's take a very quick peek at the agenda for day 2. We have only 1 keynote today and a few less speakers for our panels. So hopefully we'll have more time for discussion. And we'll try to start our first panel early as well. So let's see how that goes. Next slide. To kick us off for today's keynote speaker, we have a video presentation from Mr. Kevin Kurland. He's the Acting Assistant Secretary for Export Enforcement at the Bureau of Industry and Security at the U.S. Department of Commerce. So thank you to Mr. Kurland for those remarks. The key point that I take away is that the threat of illicit procurement requires constant vigilance amongst all involved stakeholders, and that requires a supportive partnership between government and industry. So without working together in that partnership model, it gives room for illegal trade activities, which can have a major detrimental impact on business operations through loss of your intellectual property, as well as the potential for civil and criminal penalties. And I believe we'll hear over the following panels that our state and industry representatives are aligned with this understanding. For our first panel of the day, we were going to look at developments in strategic trade regulations and controls with a number of Southeast Asian countries. Our moderator for this session is Mr. Louis Pertle. He's the regional advisor for the Export Control and Related Border Security Program at the U.S. Embassy in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Louis, please come online and lead us in your panel.
Thanks, Dan. Hello, everyone. My name is Louis Pertle, and I'm the regional advisor for the Department of State Export Control and Related Border Security Program, known as EXPIS. EXPIS is a non-proliferation capacity development program that aims to prevent the irresponsible transfers of weapons of mass destruction, conventional weapons, their delivery systems, and other related materials, including dual-use items. We achieve these goals through a robust global partnership of like-minded governments, international and non-governmental organizations, industry leaders and associations, academic institutions and think tanks, and more. The one thing that I find unique about strategic trade management is, at its core, it's a security partnership between government and the industry, meaning you have government on one side, and then you have the industry on the next, and they both must work hand in hand to form a bridge of our collective security. And on that bridge, trade security and trade facilitation must coexist to have an effective system. The good news is all the strategic trade management authorities with us today have successfully partnered with industry to create systems that act as a trade facilitation tool that promotes trade of sensitive goods and technologies while safeguarding their sensitive technology sectors from exportation. The very function of their work lets the international community know that the Philippines, Singapore, and Malaysia are trusted trading partners for sensitive goods and technologies. And that, my friends of the business community, is good news for your business. Julie, would you mind bringing up the polls, please? Oh, thank you. And before I introduce our esteemed panel, I have two poll questions. And I know, like, I'm just like a lot of you that I've seen yesterday, you know, I tend to skip out on polls, but I would encourage you to participate in at least these polls. We have about 586 people that can give voice to these questions, and they ultimately could improve your strategic trade management systems. So let's just give it a try. There's no right or wrong answer. So we have, what percentage should strategic trade management be harmonized in ASEAN? So we have fully harmonized, we have significantly harmonized, partially harmonized, slightly harmonized, or not harmonized at all. And then for our second question, we have, what is the biggest challenge companies have in complying with strategic trade management? Is it trying to understand the various laws, regulations, and permit processes? Is it the permit process is too cumbersome and complex? Do the permits take too long? Are you not sure where to find the information that would support your compliance efforts? Or is it management getting their buy-in to support your efforts as a compliance officer? And if your answer isn't there, you know, feel free to just put it in the Q&A on whatever your issues are. Okay, so can we see the, maybe I'll give them a little bit more time. Okay. Julie, would you mind showing the polls, please? All right, so at least for the first question, it appears that a majority that answered believe that the systems should be harmonized. And for the second question, it appears that, just trying to understand the various laws and regulations in the permit process. And so, like, if you put both of those questions together, it seems like if there was a more harmonized system, then maybe things would be more simpler for everyone. And so, thank you for everyone who participated in the poll. Your response is definitely important to us. And so next, we have 3 outstanding panelists joining us from the Philippines Strategic Trade Management Office, Singapore Customs, and the Malaysia Strategic Trade Secretariat. And I have personally had the pleasure to work with all 3 of the panelists, and I can vouch for their professionalism and expertise in the field. First, we have Assistant Director Janice Demanyak of the Strategic Trade Management Office of the Department of Trade and Industry in the Philippines. Janice, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Louis.
No problem. It's good to see you again.
Great to see you again virtually, Louis. Good morning, everyone. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. As mentioned by Louis, I am Janice Sasidon Di Mayakyak, and I am the Assistant Director of the SCMO. On behalf of our boss, Attorney Luis Katibayan, and my colleagues from the SCMO, I would like to thank Singapore Customs, Japan METI, and US XBIS, BIS, and INECP for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to provide updates on the SCMA. Next slide, please. Next. Among the primary responsibilities of the STMO is to conduct outreach to both industry and government stakeholders. The pandemic has not hindered the outreach. Instead, it shifted the approach from physical to online industry consultations and forums. Since 2019 up to the present, the STMO has reached out to various industries through organizing STM awareness forums, consultation sessions, industry visits, among others. Next. For this year, there are around 285 companies reached online and several companies assisted for online ICP setup. We have also engaged with several Philippine government agencies. Just this year, we have conducted SCMA awareness sessions to our newly established Philippine Space Agency. We've also built the capacity of our Customs Trade Control examiners and have reached out to our DTI Foreign Trade Service Corps for possible coordination points and linkages in the future. Next. In 2020, the STMO started its efforts to incorporate data analytics to support its operations and ensure that the rationale for policies and guidelines released to the industry are backed by actual trade data. Our Strategic Trade Industry Analytics System, or STIAS, currently contains data on Philippine exports from 2018 to 2020 and is currently being used for targeted outreach to both government and industry stakeholders. Next slide, please. There are several trade facilitation programs currently being developed by the office. And first, to jumpstart all of these programs, a memorandum of agreement on trade facilitation was entered into and signed by 6 government organizations in the Philippines, particularly the Bureau of Customs and the 4 investment promotion agencies to cooperate and improve trade facilitation processes. This MOA was signed last December 2020. Next. Several technology tools are also being developed. First is the development of a digital virtual expert, which will be deployed in our Freeport zones, the Philippine Economic Zone Authority, and we're hoping that this system will be up and running by next year. We've also built the capacity of our Customs Risk Management Office with the recently concluded data-driven targeting training or risk profiling using data analytics. Next, please. We've also just recently finished a commodity identification training and trained some of our customs personnel frontliners located in 9 major ports and airports. These major ports and airports were identified under our STS as major ports and airports in the Philippines with the highest probability of strategic goods being exported out of the country. It is also intended this year that the PESA Economic Zone officers will be trained on commodity identification training. And for this, we will be launching an e-learning platform known as Learn STM, which is the SCMO's initiative aimed at continually building the capacity of our trade control examiners and other frontline examiners, specifically on commodity identification training. It is also intended to enhance or to be used as a platform in the future to enhance the capacity of our industry compliance officers and for them to be certified as experts on STMA, and which will make it easier for companies to hire compliance officers in the Philippines. Next, I have mentioned earlier our database is TIAS, and it is regularly being updated by our data analysts in the office. Next slide, please. The SCMO also requires the establishment of internal compliance programs or ICP as a precondition for the issuance of a global authorization and to some extent as a condition for one of our general licenses. To this end, the SCMO is currently conducting, next please, 19 ongoing pre-audits, next. 11 companies have already been pre-audited, next. 10 companies have been given approved internal ICPs, and next. 2 companies have just undergone post-authorization audit this year. Next slide, please. Since the SCMO began accepting applications for registration in October 2019, a total of, next please, 44 applications have been received, 37 of which have been approved and registered. The remainder is being processed. Next. In July 2020, the SCMO began its second phase and accepted applications for export licenses from STMA registrants. Currently, the SCMO has already issued 21 governmental end-use assurances and authorizations, including 1 license denial. 7 governmental end-use assurances were issued for companies engaged in intangible transfers of nuclear technology. Next. 19 license exemption certificates were also issued pursuant to Section 15 of the STMA. Next, please. 17 licensing checks have been completed. Next. 15 companies were assisted for commodity classification. And next, 4 companies were assisted to check using our end user business advice to check whether certain customers are subject to UN sanctions or red flags. Next slide, please. To effectively implement the provisions of the STMA and assist our stakeholders, the STMO has issued several issuances to guide the public. These are shown in this slide. Next slide, please. However, I would like you to pay particular attention to the following memorandum circulars which were recently issued relevant to STMA implementation. First, it is now mandatorily required for all exporters of dual-use items to apply for an authorization with the STMO. In line with this, we are closely coordinating with our Bureau of Customs and our Philippine Economic Zone Authority to check whether certain items flagged as strategic has a requisite license from the STMO. Next. In May 2020, the STMO also issued Memorandum Circular 20-13 to inform the public that it adopts the UNSC Consolidated List of Individuals and Entities as the STMO's own list of prohibited end users. The Memorandum Circular also prohibits anyone from engaging in business with those on the prohibited end users list. We have also launched, as I have mentioned earlier, the End User Business Advice Service so that the public, most especially our small and medium enterprises, can reach out to the STMO for screening their customers. In line with this, we have also issued in January of this year a memorandum circular that prohibits any natural or juridical person operating within the Philippines or any Filipino person wherever located from engaging in brokering and financing activities if the parties involved in the transaction are those covered under UNSCR 1718 and UNSCR 2231. This is in consonance with the inclusion of sanctioned items currently listed under Annex 3 of the NSGL. This issuance is further underlined by an advisory from our Secretary Ramon M. Lopez, for the public to be more circumspect in screening their customers, and encourages businesses operating in the Philippines to update themselves on the current multilateral and unilateral list of sanctioned individuals and entities. Next. This circular is an update to the previously issued guideline on temporary suspension of administrative penalties issued last year in light of the COVID pandemic. This recently issued circular lifts the temporary suspension of administrative penalties effective on January 1, 2022. The purpose of the circular is to reiterate the obligation of covered persons to register and apply for authorizations, particularly those engaged in the export of dual-use goods and the export, financing, or brokering of items covered under Annex 3 of the NSGL. Next slide, please. Considering that the Bureau of Customs is a very big organization and is composed of numerous units with different priorities, it was proposed and agreed by both the SCMO and the Bureau of Customs that a special unit will be created to serve as a one-stop shop for functions relevant to STMA implementation. And the function of this specialized unit within the Bureau of Customs is listed, you can see it on the slide in front of you. And this would ensure that strategic trade-related transactions are facilitated and that obligations under the STMA are performed. Next slide. So my final slide is a case study on catch-all controls and our first license denial. On May 26, the STMO received information regarding an imminent export of servo motors suspected of being used in UAVs in conflict areas. Next. The following day, May 27, the shipment got flagged and held at the Ninoy Aquino International Airport by our Bureau of Customs, as there is a high probability or risk that the items may be covered under the catch-all provisions of the STMA. Next slide, please. The next day, the SCMO immediately reached out to our exporter, where it is agreed that the covered shipment will be placed on hold until an authorization is issued by the SCMO. Next slide. On May 31st, SCMO officials conducted an on-site inspection, and during the inspection, SCMO recommended that the exporter apply for individual authorization under the STMA's catch-all provision. Next slide. On June 10, SCMO received the initial documents for catch-all authorization application from the exporter. The days when the SCMO waited for the documents to be completed, including the additional documentary requirements, were excluded in calculating the period for license application. Next. On June 29, the SCMO convened an interagency meeting under our NSC STMCOM Subcommittee on Technical Reachback and NSC STMCOM Subcommittee on Risk Assessment, particularly on the possibility of the item being weaponized, as well as the suspected activities of the end user in its country of destination. Next. After careful consideration and recommendation from the interagency subcommittee and all the facts gathered by the STMO, we informed the exporter of our intent to deny the application because of certain red flags that we have seen in the transaction. The company accepted the decision and indicated that it did not intend to file a motion for reconsideration against the STMO decision. Next slide, please. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Louis.
Thank you, Janice, for your presentation. And I find the SCMO methodical implementation process very fascinating. It's like you are meticulously building your strategic trade framework piece by piece. And I also found your last slide about the servo motors very interesting. And so I hope you can share more on that whenever we get into our discussion. Okay, so second, We have a joint industry outreach veteran, Mr. Mark Lim, Assistant Head of the Trade Strategy and Security Branch of the Security of Singapore Customs. Mark, the floor is yours.
Hi, Louis. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening. I am Mark from Singapore Customs. I certainly hope I can live up to the name of being a veteran. Today, I will be sharing with you on the updates to Singapore's strategic trade controls. Next slide, please. So I will begin today's presentation with, first of all, the updates to the Strategic Goods Control Order, also known as the SGCO 2021, followed by the provision of hospitality service prescribed under the Strategic Goods Control Act, commonly known as the SGCA. Last but not least, I will provide some updates to the implementation of UNSC sanctions through our regulation of imports and exports regulations, also commonly known as the RIER. Next slide, please. So our list of controlled items was gazetted on 2nd August 2021 and will take effect on 1st October 2021, which is the end of this week. The SGCO 2021 is based on the changes made in the 2020 Wasana Arrangement Munitions List, also known as the WAML, and the 2020 European Union Dual Use List, also known as the EU Dual Use List. The changes in the SGCO 2021 can be generalized into the following three categories: the addition of new controls, the removal of controls, as well as some editorial amendments. This is what is happening every year. So these three are the generalized segments that we have broken them into. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we have some of the examples of the new controls added to the SGCO 2021. Next slide, please. So in this slide, here are some of the examples where some of the controls have been removed in the new SGCO 2021. All these will take effect later this week. Yep. Next slide, please. So other than the addition and removal of controls to the SGCO, there are several editorial amendments made as well. So these are some of the examples of the editorial amendments. Next slide, please. As some of you may be aware, with effect from 15 December 2020, entities whose sole involvement is in the provision of hospitality service for any event that facilitates the arrangement or negotiation of a contract under Section 6, subsection 1 of the Strategic Goods Control Act is not required to register the brokering activity with Singapore Customs. Next slide, please. So here are some of the updates to our 7th schedule of the RIER. So first of all is with regard to the Central African Republic. So with the adoption of UNSCR 2599, 2018, Singapore Customs has inserted a new prohibition on Central African Republic under the 7th schedule of the RIER to prohibit the export, transshipment, and transit of arms and related material with the African Union Regional Task Force. Subsequently, with the adoption of UNSCR 2536 in 2020, the export, transshipment, and transit of arms and related material with the MINUSCA, European Union training missions deployed in the Central African Republic, and the French forces under the conditions provided by paragraph 52 of the Resolution 2499 is not prohibited. Next slide, please. So, Customs has also inserted 2 new prohibitions on Somalia. First of all, with the adoption of UNSCR 2498 in 2019 and UNSCR 2551 in 2020, explosive materials and mixtures containing one or more of the following explosive materials is prohibited. The materials are nitrocellulose, tetral, and nitroglycerin. So explosive related goods such as equipment and devices specially designed to initiate explosives by electrical or non-electrical means, for example, firing sets, detonators, igniters, and detonating cord, and technology required for the production or use of any of the items that I just mentioned is prohibited. Next slide, please. So lastly, the export, transshipment, and transit of arms and related material with the government of Sudan is also prohibited with the issuance of UNSCR 1591 in 2005 on Sudan. Next slide. All right, with that, I've come to the end of my short presentation. I look forward to the discussions later. Over to you, Luis.
Thank you, Mark, for your insightful presentation. I noticed the updates and changes, and I would like to find out a little bit more about how Singapore Customs updates and removes items from their control list. As one of the world's busiest ports, I'm sure great consideration goes into that process. And last and certainly not least, we have Strategic Trade Officer and Legal Advisor Ismael Bakar of the Strategic Trade Secretariat of the Ministry of International Trade and Industry in Malaysia. Ismael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luis. Good morning and salam sejahtera to everybody. My name is Ismael Bakar, and I am the Strategic Trade Officer from the Strategic Trade Secretariat, MITI Malaysia. Malaysia would like to extend our appreciation to Singapore Customs, MITI Japan, and XBIS for the invitation to share on Malaysia's updates in strategic trade controls and regulations. Also, a big congratulations to the organizers for making this event happen, despite of the restrictions physically, and while we are still battling the COVID-19 pandemic worldwide. To move on with the presentation, I will be sharing the overview of STA 2010 in Malaysia, the 2021 updates, and also a snapshot on Malaysia's statistics and a bit of sharing of Malaysia's targeted engagements, and also our 10th year celebration of STA 2010 anniversary. Next slide, please. Next slide. Well, as a member of the United Nations, Malaysia's commitment is to ensure that there is a domestic controls legislations to prevent the wrong use of nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons and its delivery systems, as pointed under the UNSCR 1540. The enactment of STA 2010 provides our commitment on the UNSCR 1540 by establish, develop, review, and maintain appropriate, effective national export and transshipment controls over such items, including appropriate laws and also regulations to control export, transit, transshipment, and re-export. Basically, Malaysia fulfills a major portion of the UNSCR 1540 requirements through the implementation of STA 2010 and has met the requirements of having a comprehensive export control legal framework, and with its long-standing rapport and frequent interaction with the business community has been extremely crucial in being the focal point for the implementation of STA 2010. MITI has established the SDS on the 1st of August 2010 to coordinate the implementation of STA 2010. SDS is led by a strategic trade controller appointed by the Minister of MITI under Section 5 of STA 2010. At this juncture, I would like to take the opportunity to congratulate Ms. Eliza Masura Ahmad Hanipia on her appointment as the new strategic trade controller recently. Next slide. Well, STA 2010 regulates the activities of export, transshipment, transit, and brokering of strategic items, including arms and related material that will or may facilitate the design, development, and production of WMD and their delivery systems consistent with Malaysia's national security and international obligations. The strategic items may be arms and related materials or dual-use items that can be used for both commercial and military purposes. Apart from the Principal Act, the implementation of STA 2010 is being supported by several subsidiary legislations such as the Strategic Trade Regulations 2010, the Strategic Trade UNSCR Regulations 2010, and the Strategic Trade Restricted End Users and Prohibited End Users 2010. The Strategic Trade Restricted End Users and Prohibited End Users Order 2010 specifically provides the listing of restricted and prohibited end users, where individuals, entities, countries, and destinations designated by the UNSC or the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, or by the Minister of the International Trade and Industry. These entities are listed following their suspected involvement in any restricted activities as per Article 41, Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter on Sanction Measures, or under Section 8 of the STA 2010. Next slide. Next, I will share on the strategic partnership that was established in carrying out the operational and also enforcement of STA 2010. As the custodian of the STA 2010, STS spearhead on the aspect of operation of the law, regulations, and also policies. STS also maintains the National Single Window platform for permit applications on our license and our licensing partners, i.e. the Pharmaceutical Services Division of the Ministry of Health Malaysia, the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission, MCMC, and the Atomic Energy Licensing Board, EELB, uses the same system for permit issuance based on type of commodity and item identified through the Export Control Classification Number, ECCN. We also share the same SOPs and guidelines on permit processing, and from time to time, our licensing partners will provide valuable inputs and technical views in order to improving our processes in respect of export control. Licensing partners also participate in STS audit visit to companies and assist us in process the value of evaluation and determining the compliance level of the companies. Next slide. Apart from the supports we receive from our licensing partners for permit processing, we also receive tremendous support from the enforcement agencies under STA 2010 based on their area of jurisdiction. The designation of these enforcement officers is stipulated under Section 25A of STA 2010. The strategic network and partnership with the Royal Malaysian Police, the Royal Malaysian Customs Department, the Malaysia Marine Enforcement Agency, the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission, the Atomic Energy Licensing Board, Pharmaceutical Services Division, Ministry of Health Malaysia, the Central Bank of Malaysia, Securities Commission, and Labuan Offshore Financial Services Authority, and other officers as specified by the controller as the enforcement agencies under STA 2010 is essential to enhance the level of effectiveness of the implementation of STA 2010, and this will ensure the compliance of the companies even more. Continuous engagement and series of discussions are important to uphold the STA by way of deliberate productively to enhance the related SOPs and also guidelines. Next slide. Next, I will go to the 2021 updates on activities and programs. First, the internal compliance program enhancement, strategic item list, and use guidelines, and also, like I said just now, targeted engagement. Next slide. STS is pleased to inform that we have undertaken a review in strengthening the implementation of our ICP. 3 new ICP elements that were introduced transaction screening, whereby the companies are required to conduct a thorough screening and due diligence on their clients and the whole supply chain of export, transshipment, and transit activities. This is to ensure that the company knows and be prudent at all times in their activities in making sure that the supply chain is free from any possible proliferation of WMD. This is what we call the cradle to grave screening. It is important for the companies to maintain such high level of compliance to the ICP requirements and to the provisions of STA 2010. The second element is the corrective action, whereby the companies need to submit their countermeasures should a non-compliance to the ICP elements occurred. This is to ensure that the company will take the necessary actions to remedy the non-compliance immediately. STS also introduced a new element, which is the intangible technology transfer, ITT, as part of the ICP enhancement in order to facilitate exportation of strategic technology activities to companies involved in transferring of strategic technology in their business arrangement. This additional element will surely help companies which involves in ITT to enjoy the multiple and bulk permit application. The STS also has reviewed the validity period for each ICP status, which is now valid up to 5 years. This will ensure that the companies will always be vigilant in complying and adhering to all rules and regulations stipulated under STA 2010. Next slide. STS has updated our strategic item list, which has been gazetted on the 5th of April 2021, and it came into force from 26 April 2021. The updated list is based on the EU list in 2019. All of our stakeholders can access the updated list on MITI's website, www.miti.gov.my. Next slide. We also engage with companies in order excuse me. STS also engages with companies in order to reinforce the importance of companies to comply in their submission of EUS. According to the requirement of the law, the EUS under Form 5 of the Strategic Trade Regulations 2010 is a statutory form, and it needs to be followed accordingly. In addressing the unusual circumstances following the changes in workplace policy during the COVID-19 pandemic, STS gives a certain flexibility to companies in issuing the EUS with an e-signature if the consignee or end user is able to establish a process by using a reliable system or application in producing an authentic or an encrypted e-signature belonging to the authorized person undertaking the EUS. Next slide. Well, as at 31st of August 2021, there are a total of 1,969 permits issued with 14 new companies registered under STA 2010. This brings to a total of 30,269 permits approved, 626 companies registered since 2011. For evaluation exercise, as at 31st August 2021, we have conducted evaluations on 20 companies, and we hope to conduct more evaluations towards the end of the year. For outreach program, since the inception of STA 2010, a total of 448 outreach programs and capacity building programs were conducted. And as at 31st August 2021, STS has organized 23 domestic programs and 25 international programs, focusing on both the industry and academic institutions. Although STA 2010 has been in operation for 10 years, educating the diverse background of industry players remains a challenge for STS. Next slide. For targeted engagement, we always committed in having engagement with various parties in order to spread awareness on STA 2010 and related rules and regulations. This year, we have several engagements with port authorities, namely with the Johor Port Authorities, on the trade facilitation under Regulation 25 of the Strategic Trade Regulations 2010 in February 2021. This type of engagement is important for reinforcing Malaysian port authorities and freight forwarders agents' role and support in ensuring adherence to STA 2010. We also had several engagements with universities and research institutions on the institutionalization of ITT in order to make sure that the research that is going to be carried out by the universities and research institutions are free from any possible proliferation activities. For example, recently we had an engagement with the Multimedia University, MMU, Malaysia, on ITT, and we are happy to know that MMU has established a specific unit that oversees applications for study grants and collaborations by MMU students or researchers with foreign entities to ensure that such collaboration complies with STA 2010 and it is free from any possible proliferation activities. We will continue to have more engagements with more universities and research institutions in the future. Next slide. Year 2021 marks the 10th year which the STA came into force. The implementation of STA 2010, which was enacted on 10th of June 2010 and later came into force on 1st January 2011, signifies Malaysia's affirmation to deliver the obligations set forth under UNSCR 1540. In celebrating the momentous occasion, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry and STS, in collaboration with XBIS and NNSA, organized the Strategic Trade Act STA 2010 10th anniversary celebration and conference, which was held from 8 to 9 April 2021. Sorry. The aim of such event is to strengthening bilateral and regional cooperation efforts in strengthening strategic trade control and also to recognize the role and commitment of industries in building company compliance culture in strategic management. Next slide. Right, that will be all for my presentation this morning. Back to you, Luis. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ismael. And as your last slide states, the Strategic Trade Secretariat has certainly been active in strengthening bilateral and regional cooperation. SCS latest initiative, the Malaysia Strategic Trade Control Act, is very interesting. And so I was wondering if during our discussion, if you're able to share a couple of thoughts on that as well. And so Now, I invite all the panelists to join me and turn on your videos so we can begin the moderated discussion and Q&A part of the session. And for the audience, please feel free to type your name, organization, and questions in the Q&A box. We will be asking some of your questions live, and the ones that we can't get to, we will respond in the Q&A box. All right. Okay, I see everyone. So I guess the first order of business is good morning, Janice, Mark, and Ishmael. It's good to see you all again, and I hope you all are well and in good health.
Morning, Louis. Morning,
Good
everyone.
morning.
Yes.
Hello. And so, Janice, my first question is for you. I think your last slide is an excellent example of sensitive technologies. In the Philippines case, the servo motors, how it can get caught in the wrong hands. And would you mind sharing a little bit more, of course, what you can, on what happened with that case?
Okay, Louis, I'd be happy to share some information on that case study. Just to have a brief recap, just a short summary of the case, the SCMO received an imminent export of servo motors, and this is based on information received from a country partner. So the initial action done by the SCMO is to conduct commodity classification, whether those items actually fall under the NSGL. And an initial assessment of our technical experts show that these are not covered under our NSGL. However, there is further information that these items may be bound to a country of concern. So our next step was to convene our interagency subcommittees, specifically our subcommittee on technical reachback, to gain their insight on the appropriateness of the end use of the item, and also our Intel group or Intel community in the Philippines, our subcommittee on risk assessment. So we convened both of those subcommittees and shared with them the facts of the case. And then we also conducted our own checks, and we found that there are certain red flags on the transaction. First, there's a red flag on the goods because it has been previously reported in some UNSC reports that it has been used in some conflict zones in UAVs in the Middle East. And number two, the shipping route is a bit questionable because the country of destination or the ultimate destination is just a less than 2-hour flight from the Philippines, but it will still transit to country Y, which is about the same distance from the Philippines. So we cannot put two and two together, so to speak. And we verified through our foreign trade service score that assemblies from country, I'll just refer to it, the transit country is country Y, are no longer performed there due to higher taxes. So it doesn't make sense to us. And then three, there are certain end user red flags. We cannot verify the address of the end user. And we found that the board of directors of that end user were previously sanctioned by other countries for violation of export controls. And what we did was also in their website, they show that they have certain projects with different universities, etc. And we reached out to all those universities and companies, and they told us that they don't have any project with this company. So those are the red flags. And lastly, the end use of the goods is not consistent with the line of business of the ultimate end user. And the end user has no proven technical capacity to conduct such activity. And being also reminded of the Chinpo case, we found that there is a similar MO, that the payment for the goods were done by a broker in country Y when the ultimate country of destination is in country X. So those are the things that we took into consideration, not merely on the end use of the goods, but we're more focused on the red flags on the end user. So we decided to deny the license. I hope, I know it's a very long answer, but I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
No, it was very interesting because I think that it's a real world example and like a cautionary tale to companies as far as making sure that they do their due diligence processes and stuff. And fortunately, SCMO was able to catch this with catch-all controls. And so if there was a message from this case study, what message do you think that is for companies?
Well, actually, the key takeaway for us here is that something that we're telling all our industry stakeholders when we conduct outreach, that the implementation of the SDMA is a whole of nation approach. So our industry stakeholders are our first line of defense. So if they do not have their internal compliance programs, they should at least have basic KYC, know your customer, and there are red flag guidelines that are actually posted on our website. And we encourage them to conduct due diligence overall in their transactions so that they will not be exposed to bad actors, so to speak. And they could always reach out to the STMO. As I've mentioned in my presentation, we have an end user business advice. So if they don't have a system to conduct end user checks, we could assist them. Also, if unfortunately the item has already been shipped out, you can always reach out to us through voluntary self-disclosure. So those are the ways you could reach out to us, and some of the things that you can do to check your transactions. Thank you, Louis.
Okay. Oh no, thank you for such a great like real world story, and I believe that story just kind of puts everything all together. You know, we talk about know your customer, due diligence checks, and you know, because you never really know who you're getting into business with unless if you are actually going through the steps, even though it may be boring, but you just go through just to make sure that you're conducting business in the best and most legitimate way. And so, Mark, so my next question is for you. And so I thank you for sharing all of your updates on strategic items that were added or removed from the Singapore's control list. I know you had a brief moment to mention that in your presentation. Would you like to just discuss any of those changes any further?
Hi, yeah. Hi, thanks, Louis, for the question. So basically what we have, the changes were in accordance to what has happened to the WAML and the EUDL that happened last year. These are practice, so what they have changed last year, we'll incorporate them into our this year's SGCO 2021 and so on and so forth. It's an annual exercise. Some of the business implications, but definitely not limited to, is like, for example, if your item is now controlled under our strategic goods control order, you will then need a strategic goods permit unless they fall under one of the exemptions. So if your item is no longer controlled, yes, you do not need a strategic goods permit anymore before you ship or transfer the goods. However, there's still a chance that it might be used for like in relation to an activity relating to nuclear or chemical or biological weapons and all those stuff. So we always advise traders to seek clarifications from the relevant competent authorities, not necessarily Singapore Customs. They can be from SPF or NEA, HSA on their license or permit requirements. But as a first contact point, they can always look for Customs, and Customs can always direct them to the relevant competent authorities, because there's no wrong door approach here. It's a WOG effort. And then for example, for like the bulk permit holders, if let's say your goods are now listed under the new SGCO, you may actually apply for a product inclusion to your existing bulk permit. For those whose goods and technology that are no longer controlled under the SGCO, they could request for the removal from their bulk permits as well. Yeah.
Okay. And so also, whenever Singapore Customs, you know, you make a change to your control list, what goes into that decision-making process? Like how are things added or removed, or even amendments added?
We have a team, a classification team in Singapore Customs, who will periodically take a look at the changes to the WAML, the EUDL. So in the event that there's some changes to it, we'll need some time, usually about 8 months, 7, 8, 9 months or so, to actually work through internally with all the relevant stakeholders. And then we'll incorporate these changes, because at the end of the day, the basis of our SGCO is actually an amalgamation of the WAML and EUDL. So whatever they have the changes over that side, we'll incorporate them into our SGCO, of course, with the blessing of other agencies as well, because what we have in terms of strategic trade management is all an interagency effort. Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Mark. And so now I would like to check with the audience and see if there's any questions. And so, John, can we take a couple of questions from the audience?
Hi, yes, Louis. First, good morning to all the panelists. Some great presentations today, and it's actually spurred quite a bit of interest here in the Q&A panel. But the first one that we have is a generic question, I think, Louis, that would be great for all of our panelists, and that is, in the context of strategic trade management, to what extent would customs authorities contribute to fighting proliferation financing and terrorism while enforcing on UNSCR respectively? Many thanks.
Yes. So anyone feel free to take on that question.
Louis, maybe I could answer that.
Okay, please.
Basically, the question is the customs role in the implementation of strategic trade management, incorporating UNSC sanctions, among other things. Actually, that's one of the key takeaways, so to speak, from the case study that I have shared. Because when we were working with our Bureau of Customs, what we've always focused on are the commodities, because that's the work of customs authorities. But we took a step back and realized that to sort of address two issues, both items covered under the NSG and those covered by the catch-all provisions, we need to take a step back and focus on the end user first. Because one issue that crops up is that our customs officers are not well versed on the technical specifications under the NSGL. And number two, there's no one-to-one correlation between the HS codes and the NSGL codes or the ECCN codes. So it's quite tough for them. But it's easier for them to check red flags on the end user. So that's what we're doing right now. We're incorporating that to their selectivity tool, so it's easier for them. And I have mentioned we're in the process of coming up with a digital virtual expert, which will incorporate an artificial intelligence from a licensing officer in the SCMO and a customs expert. Incorporating both those, the customs officer will just go to that software and check yes, no questions, and then that software will tell them whether to release or hold a certain item. So that will facilitate trade and address problems of continuity also in the future. I hope I answered the question. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was great. So John, did we have any more questions?
Yes, I actually have another great question for all panelists. Louis, it's good to see that more and more countries are able to establish their export control laws, but some countries, their export control laws are very unique, such as the Japan export control law, China export control law, and Philippines. And all of these are unique to each other, and this could become an issue for the MNC. Are there any chances that there will be a joint effort to streamline the strategic item list from different export control regulations?
That is a good question. Anyone want to take that one on?
Allow me, Louis, to try to answer this question.
Okay, thank you.
I think no chance. No lah, I'm joking. Not really, no chance. I mean, if you ask me if there's a chance, there is always a chance for things to happen. But we have to understand that the basis of all these export control laws, there is a reason for having all these different control laws in the first place, and why we are different. Because, like, for example, if we talk about like this EU, then they will have their own laws, and then after that, organizations like BAFA as well as Netherlands, they will incorporate into their own national laws. So for Singapore and this area, so far is we do have different export control laws, but because that's taking into consideration the whole of the government, the totality, the consideration, all the things that we have in mind, as well as if you are asking along the lines like for example, Singapore is not actually a member of some of the the multilateral export control regimes and stuff like this, whereas, for example, US is and stuff like this. So there are bound to be difference in our export control laws as well as the way we adopt the lease and as well. Because, like, for example, if you are a member of this lease or something, there are certain standards and certain criteria to meet, whereas if you are just unilaterally adherent to it, there is another standards to meet as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you ask me, the chances of having everything aligned is not possible, but customs authorities are always looking at different ways to how we can work together and try to make it as facilitative as the traders, because the last thing we want is for the trading community to deem all this as just hurdles and hurdles and hurdles and more red tapes for everybody. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And did anyone else?
If I may add a little bit to what Mark is saying. I echoed what Mark just said just now, and also it is in a local context of countries, Malaysia, Singapore, and also Thailand, Philippines, and all. The customs law, the export control law is special or unique to such countries. But we always open to any joint effort or arrangement to ease the process of having this export control for the, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you. I appreciate your comments. And so, Janice, did you have anything that you wanted to add to it?
Actually, I support the answers of my colleagues from Malaysia and Singapore, and would just like to add that there are certain points of convergence of our export control legislations, but there are some points that are very particular or granular for each country. Like the Philippines faces different challenges, like we have local terrorists. So there are several things that we incorporate in our export control legislation that cannot be seen possibly in Malaysia or in Singapore. So there are points of convergence, but there are also things that are very granular or specific to each country. Thank you, Louis.
Okay, thank you. And so I guess my takeaway is, of course, every country has to have, country-specific controls, but there may be some areas on the top end of some type of convergence or maybe harmonization of the controls. Okay. And so I just have one last question, and this is for you, Ismael. And so, I saw your last slide. It was talking about the 10th anniversary, and I remember that the deputy minister announced this initiative called the Malaysia Strategic Trade Control Community, or Mystique. I was wondering if you would elaborate a little bit more on it. Just let us know what that's about.
Yeah, thank you, Luis. You're actually putting me on the spot, but I will try to answer the question. Well, basically, regarding Mystique, currently we don't have any single entity that focuses on export control matters other than SDS. Thus, Mystique, the establishment of Mystique is meant to create that pool of industry players, researchers, organizations that deal with strategic items that can provide advisory role and support on matters related to strategic trade management to the public. Well, as at now, for the development of MYSTIC, because it is still in working stage. I can say it's still in a working stage, and also we have a lot of consultations and engagements for the rolling out of MYSTIC, and we have established a nucleus team in SDS to oversee the development of MYSTIC. As of now, currently, we'll make it like as a program under SDS, but we hope that it will grow to what we expect of MYSTIC, that is an establishment of its own in the near future. Thank you, Ms.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Ismael, for that. And I'm very interested in the development of that as well. And so we now that's our time actually. So we need to close the session. And so I thank you, Janice, Mark, and Ismael, for providing us your updates and giving us your insights into your processes and sharing the direction of your organization. And to the audience, thank you for attending this session. And Dan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lewis, for moderating, and thanks to Janice, Mark, and Ismael for the country updates. It looked like many of our audience members were quite eager, waiting for these updates, and there were a ton of questions, and we weren't able to get to them all because there were so many, but we will follow up in the Q&A box with you. I also wanted to mention that we had several comments that were very complimentary of the presentations and the quality of the information provided. So great job all. I wanted to add a couple comments myself as well about these three countries, starting with Malaysia. I'd like to say that DOE is really proud of our partnership with Malaysia, and we often hold Malaysia up as a great success story for developing a great STC system, and that was recognized in the STA 2010 anniversary event that Ismael talked about. With respect to the Philippines, I wanted to mention something that just recently happened, just maybe yesterday. The Institute for Science and International Security came out with its biennial assessment of STC systems. It's called the Peddling Peril Index. And that index assessed Philippines as the country with the most improved STC system in the world over the past 2 years. So congratulations to Philippines on that accomplishment. In addition, that index also sorts all of the countries into 3 tiers, and Singapore was assessed as having the best STC system in its tier. So all 3 countries are doing really great work in this area. And it's a fantastic group. So it was a real pleasure to have all 3 of the panelists speak to us today. Now we're going to pivot to our industry colleagues and start on a topic that had quite a few questions related to it yesterday. So I think we'll have a lot of interest on this. So our second panel is on managing supply chain risks and internal compliance plan, ICP best practices. And this panel is going to be moderated by Mr. Marko Vuksanovic. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. He's the principal of Asia Pacific at Tradewin Customs and Trade Consulting. Marko, please.
Thank you, Dan. Firstly, I'd like to thank the organizers for encouraging and facilitating discussion around these topics. And of course, for the invitation to moderate this forum. And good morning to all the participants and attendees. I hope you can all hear me well. If you can't, yell out. The agenda for today, managing supply chain risk and internal compliance plan best practices. Relevant to many parties. Right, it's not just relevant to operators within the international community, but many parties across various sectors. And our panelists for this session, although all service providers, come from different sectors of the industry, really reflecting the roles different parties play, right? So amongst our panelists, we have Fortune 500 service-based logistics company. We have a business consulting firm and a data / analytics firm providing platforms for more informed and efficient decisions, right, which is critical, specifically around associated risks. And I'll get to introducing our panelists as we sort of go along. As for myself, the moderator for this panel, my name is Marko Vuksanovic. I'm the principal for Tradewin, the Asia Pacific region. So our firm, assists operators really navigate the regulatory risks and opportunities associated with cross-border trade in many areas, including export controls. A lot of customers we speak to, having varying degrees of familiarity with export controls. Of course, different challenges that they're facing, and some, of course, learn the hard way, right, by not having adequate controls, being subject to regulatory scrutiny and penalties and delays and so forth. At which point they decide to assess and structure a compliance program. But the common denominator here is that each firm engaged in cross-border trade deals with managing supply chain risk. And I think the following panelists will each give their take, on their part, what they're, as to what they're seeing and the part that they play. So our first panelist, just before I get to that, actually, one of the, when we're engaged by customers in assessing export compliance risks or developing procedures, a common question that it gets asked, sometimes is, shouldn't our freight forwarders be doing this, right? Or in response to the question, how do you manage export controls? Some believe that it's solely the responsibility of their brokers or their logistics partners. And this really leads me into our first panelist. I'm sure there will be quite a few questions here. To give us some insight into risk management solutions. We've spoken quite a bit about risk. We have our final panelist, Douglas Wolfson from Hong Kong. Douglas is a director of financial crime compliance at LexisNexis Risk Solutions in Asia. Again, someone with a wealth of experience in cross-border trade risk management. And risks of not only shipping but also inadvertently financing denied parties being implicated in such transactions is real, right? And Douglas will tell us all about it. He and his team provide some solutions around this, and I personally find this quite fascinating. So I'm as eager to hear about it as probably you are. Doug, 15 minutes or so is probably not enough time, but you want to tell the audience what it is you do?
I'll do what I can to keep in time and make sure we can get to the questions. Thank you, Marko. As Marko mentioned, Douglas Wolfson, and I'm responsible for the financial crime compliance commercial strategy for LexisNexis Risk Solutions Group here in Asia Pacific. I am based in Hong Kong, but have responsibility for the entire region. And I think one of the things that I'm actually going to discuss today is what makes it so interesting and what makes it really difficult for companies, for financial institutions, insurance companies in the region is really that it is so complicated, and there are so many different regulations, there are so many different requirements, and there are many different ways to sort of solve the problem. So I'd like to go through some of those today, talking primarily about technology. If Manal and Johnny talked about the what, I'm going to talk a bit about the how and best practices in that space. You know, hopefully this will be a valuable and enlightening session for you. Julie, if I can ask you to just move to the next slide, please. Just a reminder, obviously, just need to make sure I remind you that this is not legal guidance, you know, and it should not be taken as such. So please make sure that if you, you know, you have any questions, you speak to your internal or external law firm or lawyers or attorneys. Next slide, please, Julie. I want to start by sort of putting the problem in context, and you know, it's really important to do when we talk about, you know, the what, when we talk about the how, when we talk about compliance, because compliance is really difficult. The trade-based money laundering, sanctions evasions, you know, dual-use goods evasion problems that we face are large problems. They're millions to billion-dollar problems. The biggest problem in all of it, though, however, is actually the size of trade. Annual global trade is in the trillions. It's obviously absolutely massive, and so even though the risky behavior, the trade-based money laundering, the sanctions evasions, all of that is very large itself, it gets lost in sort of a significantly bigger pool of transactions, and so it becomes really difficult. I put up a picture here of sort of a needle in a haystack. We view and we discuss the problem as even more difficult than that. I like to talk about how, you know, trade-based money laundering, sanctions evasions is you're almost looking for a very specific needle in a pile of needles. And all the transactions look the same, all the transactions seem the same, but it's really difficult to figure out which of those transactions are the actual problematic transactions. And the reason for this is in part because there are so many different players. Manal talked about at the beginning the 6 different categories of players, but within those you have so many different entities that are involved, and there's so many different levels of performance. Some regulators are much more on top of this than others. Some companies screen, you know, much better than others and know what they're looking for and use the tools that we're going to talk about in a minute a little bit better than you know, than other companies and financial institutions. And I think we have to acknowledge in this space that part of the problem is that the criminals are very smart, and they're, you know, they say water always finds its level. This is sort of exactly the problem. Criminals are always going to find the lowest common denominator. They're always going to find the entity with the loosest, the market with the loosest restrictions. They're always going to find the companies that do the least amount of screening. They're unfortunately very good at this, and so, you know, it's important that we keep bringing up that lowest common denominator and keep making it more and more difficult for the people that are trying to skirt the rules. And to sort of give a little bit more guidance around this, I really liked on Manal's first slide how she talked about 83.3% compliance is zero compliance. And I think, you know, it's sort of a different view that I see, but it's a very similar type of problem. I saw a survey recently. This isn't one of the surveys I'm going to discuss in a minute. This isn't one of our surveys. It was an external survey by a sort of a training company and sort of an educational company that showed that, you know, they were talking about the various problems within and various actions within screening for sanctions evasions and trade-based money laundering. And it said that the response to one of the questions was essentially that 70% of the respondents, and it was a statistically significant number, but 70% of the respondents did not do a significant amount of sanctions screening. Sanctions screening is literally the first step in stopping money laundering, stopping sanctions evasion, and to know that 30% of the market out there is not doing it is hugely problematic, right? It makes you realize that the criminals are going to find those entities, and they're going to drive business through those entities because they're not doing the key essential bits, those 5 or 6 steps of compliance to ensure that you have a good program. And it's really key that we get up to speed on this because we need every single entity out there to have the best processes, the best procedures, the best programs, and of course, the best technology, right? And the reason why technology is so essential, it again comes back to that looking for a needle in a stack of needles. There are trillions of dollars of trades. There are millions to billions of transactions every single year. And so to be able to screen all of those is not a job that people can do, right? We need technology. We need better technology, stronger technology, faster technology with better analytics to make sure that we are finding those transactions because people can't deliver against it. I'm going to discuss that as well in a minute. But when you talk about the ability for humans to be able to go through that number of transactions very quickly, it's one of the largest stress points in banks is just simply the number of transactions that they have to get through and the number of alerts and false positives that are raised. And there are a number of underlying factors for this, but it's really important to acknowledge in the first step that technology is key. Julie, if I can ask you to move to the next slide, please. So we, under one of our companies, Acuity, which some of you may know for the trade solutions and the screening solutions, we ran a survey to discuss trade, and we discussed it across both cargo and financial institution firms that are doing trade finance, and we asked them, where do they plan to invest? Where do they see the biggest issues, and where do they need to improve where they're doing business? And I think number one amongst them is very clearly the digitization of documents, and this is essential. I was speaking recently with the head of legal for a very large freight forwarding firm, a name that every single one of you would know. And he was saying that his biggest issue is the fact that they still receive a significant amount of information from customers on paper. And paper is hugely problematic because there can be mistakes when it's being translated to digital. It can't be scanned very quickly, and you have to go through one by one. I talk about when in my banking career, I was a relationship manager, and we had a customer that had some screening hits. My compliance department, when I was a relationship manager, came over to my desk and handed a stack of papers to me and asked me to go through them one by one to make sure that none of the people in the alerts was my customer. And so this is a hugely inefficient process and is something that requires, being solved. And digitization is the answer to that. And there's no doubt that this is the key focus of firms. Additionally, the integration and interconnectivity of systems, this is very related to the first one. And it's important to have good data, right? You have to have 2 sets of very good data. Your customer data and your reference data have to be very good because, again, on the flip side, on the government and regulator side, a lot of times you're receiving dual-use goods lists that are in PDF form. And again, that's very difficult to use. So you need to find digitized versions of that to make sure that you can compare it to the reference data from your customers. Analytics and behavioral data, along with AI and machine learning, those go very much hand in hand, right? Having good analytics drives good AI and machine learning models. And these are both essential for reducing false positives and for ensuring the alerts that you're looking at are the right alerts that you want to be looking at. Because remember, a false positive is not a risky individual. A false positive is a person that, or an entity or a company or a transaction that is has a name or has a chemical symbol that's near one that's risky. However, it is not that risky entity. And so it's really important to be working with those computer analytics to make sure that you are getting the absolute best decision making out of this, because at the end of the day, that's the point. And I'm going to talk about this in literally 1 minute. The importance here is that the humans are doing the jobs that humans are good at, and the computers are doing the jobs that the computers are good at. The computers need to be doing the job of, doing that first level screening, the alerts, reducing the false positives, eliminating alerts that don't seem risky, that seem like false positives, that are clearly false positives, whereas humans need to be able to do that second level thinking and research around the alerts to make sure that, anything that is actually risky, that the computer systems, the technology can't eliminate in that first go around, to make sure that you're making the right decision about it. The final piece where, the investment is happening outside of alternative data, which is sort of a catch-all, is blockchain. Blockchain is obviously making strides. Trade is one of the areas where blockchain seems to be having the most, really the most value in terms of, delivering value outside of, the original cryptocurrency type use cases. I don't think it's there yet, but it's definitely moving in the right direction and is potentially a hugely valuable piece of technology that we can use going forward. Next slide, please, Julie. On this final slide, I just want to sort of drive home that value of technology and the value of technology versus the individuals. LexisNexis Risk Solutions Group, we did a survey. We do a survey annually called the True Cost of Compliance Survey. And in it, we try to determine the actual, dollar amount cost of compliance in each region globally, what the total cost is globally, but then we try to break it down into more value-added insights as well. And one of the most interesting pieces of research that we found, and this is a third-party company that does all the research. We don't know who the respondents are. They don't know that we're the sponsor. But what we found is that companies that use less technology and spend less than the average on technology than the industry as a whole, and we're talking about large to medium-sized financial institutions here, end up spending significantly more per FTE than companies spend above average on technology. The reasons for this are very simple and very intuitive. You have the ability to create economies of scale with, when you're using all of that technology, you're eliminating alerts. You don't need those people to be that first level of alert checking. You can send those through the system using data analytics, using AI, using machine learning. You have the ability to eliminate those, and then you can focus on the real risk, and your people can focus on the real risk. And this is hugely important. It doesn't mean that the people in your team should be replaced with technology. That's not the way that we look at it. The way that we look at it is by introducing the technology, it gives you the opportunity to upskill your staff, be able to provide those value-added services that are required to have a good compliance program, to make sure that the difficult accounts are being checked by people who have training. We talked, both Manal and Johnny talked about the importance of training. To have that, to have those people doing those higher value roles, to make sure that you are getting the absolute best out of your technology and the absolute best out of your people. I'll say, just in finishing, that probably the most important bit of this slide is that bottom piece where you see that average cost of compliance. This is total compliance program cost versus the number of FTEs, and it shows very clearly that the cost of compliance is significantly less, $57,000 per FTE on average, when you use more technology and gain those economies of scale. So Marco, just to make sure that we have enough time and we can answer some questions, I'm happy to finish there. And thank you for having me. Thank you to the Department of Energy, Department of Commerce for having me here today.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Doug, and thanks for thoughtful on the time as well. You know, of the tactical activities in day-to-day execution, you know, restricted party screening being one of the fundamental risk mitigation processes. You know, I'm surprised and equally concerned by, you know, the statistics shared. It's the number of operators that don't manage this either effectively or efficiently. That's to your point, and I love the point that you made. You know, with technology not being the sole you know, answer, right? But it being an enabler to enable the operators to manage it more effectively, manage it more efficiently. Love that. I'm sure we have a ton of questions, and we might get started on them. Well, we've got quite a few questions actually for Johnny here, so I might start with that. Johnny, what are PRC's approaches in implementing trade sanctions against the Democratic Republic of Korea, Iran, and other UN sanctioned entities? Could you give us a bit of insight into that?
Yeah, actually, I can see that I have got 7 questions here. You are asking the fifth question, that is, what are the PRC's approach in implementing the trade sanctions against DPRK, Iran, and other UNSC sanctioned entities? Well, the quick answer is that China gonna implement those sanctions adopted by UNSC, because China is the permanent member of the UNSC. Those sanction measures passed or enacted will have the confirmation or approval of China as a member as well. So the mechanism there is that China tend to implement those sanctions through different regulatory bodies for different industries. For example, for the financial institutions, mainly the notice will come from the People's Bank, the Central Bank of China, for those banks' insurance regarding what kind of activities are prohibited or need approval from the official with transaction with DPRK, Iran, etc. If regarding the logistics industry, then the order may come from the Ministry of Traffic and Transportation regarding what kind of logistic services are prohibited or restricted in this regard. And customs and the foreign exchange administrations, they will have their jurisdictions on exporters, importers, and also the due diligence on the sensitive destinations when the exporter submits customs declarations to the officials. So they will have their alert system to stop or to tell the exporter that this transaction is prohibited. That's the general mechanism for China. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you. Manal, we might move over to you. We have a question here as a logistics service provider. What is your comments on managing local languages to manage the denied party sanctions or screening?
Yeah, thanks, Marco. So there was that question and then a follow-up to it. So, you know, from a forwarder perspective, our systems do allow for, you know, entity names to be housed in local characters, as well as requiring an English translation. And then those databases are screened systematically and transactionally. This is where you have a manual element as well involved in ensuring the accuracy of that translation, but also ensuring that all the entities found on documentation or as part of a transaction all recorded in order for them to be screened, right? Systems, and as Doug mentioned, systems go a long way in making that process more efficient, but there's always going to be that manual intervention of understanding why you're screening and who you need to screen. And that will solely, depend on the people doing the screening and ensuring they're trained effectively.
Marco, if you don't mind me adding to that, I think Manal raises an excellent point, which is the value. We talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about machine learning, we talk about all of these fuzzy logic screening techniques, but at the end of the day, the importance of good, clean data is so essential in local language, in English language, in whatever language you might be operating. It's really key that that reference data, you have to be able to provide it both in the original language, in the original characters, and translations, because you don't know where it's going to be screened. And I'll take for instance our approach for this. We have I think about 500-600 researchers around the world who even when they receive something, they see a new name added to an OFAC list and it's only in English, that research is there to go and find local language names to make sure that that information is there when you're screening it, because as we're saying, the goal is ultimately to reduce those the manual intervention. It will always be there, but you want it to be as small as possible. So having that clean data set is essential.
Right.
Yeah,
Thanks, Doug,
actually,
and thanks for adding those comments as well. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, here I have got a question that's relevant to this discussion. Say, many MNCs may screen end customers globally in a server outside China. What's your perspective of the accountability of this practice in the context of China's data security law? My simple comment is that this way is not sustainable, because you will face the question how to update and transfer China-related data to overseas-based servers in the future, because the data security law has a very tight control on that kind of behavior, particularly the data pertaining to the natural person's information. Actually, in the practice, many law firms or consulting firms, when they doing the service to China-based clients, they would specifically say that don't give us anything that may be defined as state secrets or anything or pertaining to the China natural persons information in that regard. So the solution here, we see many big companies like Apple and Tesla, is to establish a local China-based data center to meet that kind of compliance requirements. Yeah, thank you.
So that you raise an excellent point, and it's with the new data security law as well. It's another point that's this has become a bit more problematic, and the advice that we give clients, especially our large MNC clients, is very much to set up a local on-site data center in China, or run it on their own servers within their business to do their screening, because it's essential, and quite frankly, with the firewall, it's very difficult to get data in and out anyway, and so it is safer in terms of operating within China. It's more efficient and effective, and allows to ensure that they're meeting all of their requirements under those laws. We've actually just published a paper, a two-part blog on exactly this subject, on why it's essential for multinational corporations to have on-site screening within China. Very, very topical.
Yeah. Thank you to all the panelists for sort of bouncing that question around. Said at the beginning of the session that you all are rock stars, and that just proves the point. Speaking of rock stars, I'm sure everybody noticed the drum kit in Manal's background. Rarely is trade compliance associated with anything other than being a dry topic. So, seeing that, songs aren't written about trade compliance. There's only a few movies out there. So seeing that certainly brought a spring in my step this morning.
It's a good stress reliever.
Oh, it is. Oh, I bet. I mean, yeah. better than a punching bag too, I guess. We've got a ton of questions here, and we're not going to get a chance to go through all of them. We're going to go over just a little bit purely because of the relevance of the subjects and the number of questions. So I'll try to power through them. For Johnny, is it true that today China has no embargoes for any countries? Want to give us a few words on that?
Sorry.
Is it the question asks? Is it true that today China has no embargoes on any countries?
Yes, that's true. That's true. The statement is true. China has no unilateral sanctions on any countries. No, not yet.
Okay. Thank you for that, for clarifying that. And we're going to stick with you for just one or two more questions. How do you differentiate China's cryptography law with export control law? Crypto law has its own import-export control list. Is this list the same as the commercial encryption product list under the export control?
Okay, a recommendation to review this issue is that please consider that the crypto law is a part of the export control regime, because the encryption control list actually constitutes an integral part of the overall China's dual-use export control list. So that way you will be more, reasonable in define and conclude your judgment there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's see what we have here. A question for Manal. Manal, how do you assist your own customers in making sure that they meet their obligations and comply with their responsibilities?
Yeah, no, thanks, Marco. A big part of that is ensuring that we educate our clients and ourselves directly. I'm actually going to throw this one right at you, Marco, because a part of being a forwarder and a broker is obviously identifying, red flags, educating, but we cannot get involved necessarily in the specifics that the clients need to review and look at. And this is where, maybe I can defer to you being in that consulting arena to provide more detail.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you. And I mean, that sort of makes sense. As a service provider, you can guide them to the right path, but when it comes to the execution with that right path, that tends to be, I suppose, the initiative needs to be at the customer's end to take that up. We're going to throw one more question. We're going to throw one more question at Johnny. Johnny, are there any upcoming laws in China that will prohibit China companies from filling up end user statements requested by foreign entities?
My personal opinion is that no, because currently the practice is that those certificates, end-use statements, will be issued by the authorities, sometimes from the Ministry of Commerce, based on a unified templates that China companies can request authority to help issue that statement, so they can send and share this official statement with their foreign parties or counterparts there. So this is a mature practice in China, and the government is satisfied with that process as well.
Okay. Look, we're simply not going to be able to get to every one of these questions. We're already considerably over time, but we will have these questions answered. We'll have them directed or assigned to the panelists and answered through the platform. To the panelists, thank you very much for your time. You've been very generous and provided a very insightful set of presentations. Thank you. And of course, once again, to our organizers, a very big thank you for encouraging discussion in this field. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marco. That was a great moderation, a great panel. Thank you to our panelists, Manal, Johnny, and Douglas, for some very informative and helpful presentations on which is clearly a critical topic for this audience. We had Manal, who is our musician. I think Johnny was the most popular, and Douglas scared us with some frightening statistics, including the one that caught my attention the most, that many companies are not doing the most basic sanction screening. So lots of room for improvement. Was it 30% or 70% aren't doing the basic sanction screening? That wasn't clear to me.
So thankfully, between the two, it's the smaller one. It's 30% who
Okay.
are not doing the screening, but it's still, I think we'd all agree that's an exceptionally large number.
Yes, too many. So a lot of room for improvement. So I hope all the representatives from the companies listening into this took some useful information away from this session. And we still have another great session coming up here. So I hope everybody sticks around for this one. I'm going to turn it over now to George Tan, the principal at Global Trade Security Consulting, and for his panel on intangible technology transfer and intellectual property rights and trade secret concerns in a research or academic environment. So I think this is going to be a great panel as well, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. George, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm George Tan, as introduced. I will not go into lengthy discussions from my side, but rather I save the time for Q&A. Today, we are going to touch the topics on intangible technology transfer and intellectual properties rights, IPR, and trade secrets, concerns in the research, that is your company, industry, or academic environment. So before we start, perhaps it would be good to let the audience answer some questions. In fact, we have put up some poll. Dan, can you please put up the question? The question is, have you ever applied for an ITT permit from Singapore Customs or your national customs authority? I think this is very significant because ITT is relying on self-management, company self-management very much. So I hope all the audience, please give your answer, whether it's yes or no, so that we know to what extent the discussion later on we can bring forward to. All right, shall we close the poll? And can we see the answer? Majority of them have not applied for ITT, and only a very small amount has such experience. But let me remind all the audience, trade secrets is the crown jewels of your company. Intellectual properties is definitely one way to protect your business. So let's go into the detail of our session today. Today we have three panelists. The first panelist is Professor Akihiko Obayashi. He's working in the Center for Innovations and Business Promotions, Hokkaido University in Japan. Obayashi-san, please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you, Tan-san, for your moderation. My name is Akihiko Obayashi, and professor of Hokkaido University for 5 years. And my presentation, next slide, please. Okay, my presentation consists of those topics around ITT and trade secrets. Next slide, please. At first, I'd like to introduce Hokkaido University briefly. This slide is the bust of Dr. Clark. In 1876, Dr. Clark established Sapporo Agricultural College in Hokkaido. This college is the predecessor of Hokkaido University. In Japan, he is very famous for his English words. Boys be ambitious. So Many high school students run for Hokkaido University inspired by his work. Next slide, please. This slide shows 4 basic philosophies of Hokkaido University. They were all descended from Sapporo Agricultural College. Next slide, please. Hokkaido University resides in Sapporo. Sapporo is the 5th biggest city in Japan with around 2 million people. Next slide, please. So about 1% of Sapporo 2 million people are the students of Hokkaido University, and the overseas students account for more than 10% of them. Next slide, please. So, security export control of Hokkaido University. This slide shows the structure of security export control of Hokkaido University. Head of security export control is the president of Hokkaido University, and the director appointed by the president is taking the role of general manager of security export control. Dual checking mechanism is adopted. The primary examination is done by faculty. This is the first step. And the secondary examination is done by the expert of the Security Export Control Office. Collaboration between administrative staff and faculty is important. Administrative staff are the organizational infrastructure, and they take the core part of risk management. On the other hand, faculty are most proficient and know very well about the technology with which they provide. They are specialists in relevant field. So, administrative staff and faculty can create complementary relationship, and it is essential for both parties to function collaboratively. Next slide, please. ITT for academia. Next slide, please. ITT. Security export control deals with export of goods and transfer of technologies. As for technology, it has the characteristics of intangible. But technology is not aging compared with goods that are tangible and vulnerable to aging, and most importantly, technology is easy to transfer. Therefore, unauthorized ITT, including know-how, should be prohibited. This is especially important for universities dealing with cutting-edge technologies. Academic freedom versus ITT, it is important to find balance between openness and security. We have to defend important values such as free speech and academic freedom with the prerequisite of regulatory compliance. At the beginning of research projects, drawing clear lines between what is controlled and what is openly shared and publicly available is critical to ITT. Research fields so diverse. What's an arrangement or categories such as computer, communication, laser, sensor, etc. All sorts of engineering. NSG for nuclear engineering, MTCR for space engineering such as rocket and satellite, and the AZ for Faculty of Pharmacy and Faculty of Veterinary. The task is very complex and tough in case of university. Not enough manpower is assigned to deal with the issue in reality. Next slide, please. Due to the fact mentioned so far, effective method may be required. From my 5 years experience at Hokkaido University, I think face-to-face meeting directly at the office of the faculty dealing with sensitive goods or technology is most important and effective. Every year, faculty development is provided for the faculties of graduate student of engineering, etc. The contents include basics of list control and catch-all controls, how to understand the combined matrix table, that is to combine technology and goods. I'll later explain. Relationship between the foreign end user list, which is similar to US entity list, and the commodity watch list. Also, application for individual validated license from the minister, and management of bulk license inside Hokkaido University. Lastly, university-wide internal audit and identify issues to be improved and implement PDCA cycle. Next slide, please. Tools for ITT. Thank you. List control. METI, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry in Japan, publicized a table that combines list control goods or with technology considering the usage of the universities. The table allows easier acknowledgement of what kind of list control technologies are relevant to what goods. Thus, it reduces the burden of classification of technologies. Catch-all control. For the transaction with an entity in the foreign end user list, it is necessary to check the type of WMD. Nuclear, biochemical, and missiles do not match the type of concerned end use of the goods by reference to commodity watch list. Faculty development, I have already explained. ICP, Internal Compliance Program, is a regulation for each university. The compliance requirements required by the law is set forth by ICP in higher degrees. Guidance for control of sensitive technology is the most important tool for security export control of universities. Self-assessment checklist is the tool to evaluate what level you are at. Guideline for classification is assortment of case studies for classification. They are all provided by METI. As METI Araki-san explained yesterday, advisor for voluntary export control is the project METI introduced to promote voluntary export control for universities across the nation in 2017. The first focus was on the universities which deal with control technology or goods, but there is no ICP yet. At present, there are around 20 advisors with expertise and they are dispatched to universities. Advisors consult universities and help establish ICP customized for their own situation. As of April 2021, all national universities, that is 86 universities, have established ICP. I'm one of the advisors and have been dispatched to 5 universities. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide. Yesterday, there was an update session on emerging technology. It was very informative. For universities, the impact of emerging technology seems to be very huge because almost all fields are relevant to research activities for universities, such as AI, robotics, etc. Especially AI is widely investigated, even in the Department of Literature. So we have to watch carefully about how they will be implemented. The concept of economic security has been introduced for a few years now. Economic security is a buzzword at present and can be seen on newspapers every day. However, it is not easy to explain exactly what is economic security. Starting with the EU, human rights are to be incorporated in addition to the control of traditional WMD and conventional weapons. Thus, security export control has been broadened and widely expanded, so it's not easy to catch up. Under these circumstances, CISCO journal is a useful tool in Japan to follow the trends mentioned above. I use the journal often to explain to the faculty. Next slide, please. Various activities. At present, there are several regional initiatives in Japan to promote security export control for academia. The main purpose is to share the questions and the worries arising from the daily activities among the members and consider them as frankly as possible. These initiatives are voluntary. Hokkaido Network is one of the regional initiatives. Hokkaido area is unique in its inclusion of not only universities but also technical colleges. Hokkaido Network did its first event in July 2019, so this is comparatively young network. Hokkaido University took the first head of the network. We intend to have network event twice a year. The next one is Export Control Day for Academia, in short EFA. This is an annual event for universities across the nation. This event was originated in 2013, inspired by the movement of BAFA, Germany. EFA is also voluntary. EFA 2020 was the 8th event and I was the chairman. The theme of the event was ITT for Academia. EFA is supported by METI and many governmental organizations in Japan. Also, thanks to METI, we had a guest speaker from University of Pennsylvania, Missy Peroso. Due to COVID-19, we did EFA 2020 online and obtained over 8,000 access in the long run. The third one is interaction with foreign universities. That is USA and Japan. Through international exchange, we can recognize common issues to be solved and learn from the difference in regulations between the two countries. I think it's a good approach. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is the last slide, trade secrets. To prevent technology outflow, we have to care about trade secrets. Trade secrets is also very important for risk management in universities. It is true that major part of trade secrets comes from domestic companies at present. However, the trend of globalization accelerates the necessity of adequate control of trade secrets with global companies. Trade secrets are comparatively new compared with security export control. To promote joint research activities with companies, the adequate control of trade secret is indispensable to protect their IPR. Governing law is different. Foreign Exchange and Foreign Trade Act for Security Export Control and Unfair Competition Prevention Act for trade secrets. The same organization deals with both companies at Hokkaido University. Non-disclosure agreement is the first step. 3 levels of classification are usually set in the real usage. Informed consent for students. When involving students in the joint research with companies, it is important to avoid disadvantage to the students as much as possible. And students should be allowed to participate only after confirming their consent. Next slide, please. Well, that's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention. Back over to Chan-san.
ありがとうございました。Thank you very much, Obas-san. Well, I think very good presentations, and Obas-san has listed out very important points I'd like to summarize for you. First, academic freedom versus ITT in relation to regulatory compliance. This is extremely important. And second, 100% of the Japanese national university already started to have their own internal compliance program, and it is self-motivated advisors dispatched from university to support other universities to set up their internal compliance program. And third, emerging technologies versus foundational technology, which was also discussed yesterday. And it is extremely important, particularly for the university, because university carry out a lot of research. Number 4, there are events organized by the university voluntarily, particularly in Hokkaido area. And this is extremely good to raise the awareness among the community. The colleges, as Obasa mentioned about the colleges that technical colleges, there are many technical colleges in Hokkaido. And last but not least, trade secrets. Not only the university research, but industries working collaborations with the university to develop new technologies. And trade secrets is extremely important, and it is a crown jewel of the company's survival. So I think it's a very good and enlightening sessions, and I hope this will help our region's institutions, universities, to seriously looking into establishing a more robust and conducting a due diligence to set up their internal compliance program. Once again, thank you, Obasa-san.
Thank you very much for your excellent summarization.
Thank you. And next, I would like to introduce the second. Next, I would like to introduce our last panelist, Ms. Veronica Palacios, Senior Manager, Global Trade Compliance, Scholastica LLC. Veronica, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the organizers, to the Bureau of Industry and Security, Export Control and Related Border Security, Department of Energy, Japan Ministry of Economy, and Singapore Customs. It is a pleasure to be here with you guys today. So thank you so much for the invitation. Next slide. Next slide. And today I'm going to be discussing technology export controls, and I'd like to focus on intangible technology export controls, but just to provide a little bit of the background with regards to my presentation, I'll be discussing mainly from the point of view of U.S. Department of Commerce, Bureau of Industry and Security, Export Administration regulations. So these are the regulations that control exports of dual-use goods, which could be used for both civil purposes or military purposes. And this, I just came up with this definition, but it's based on the general definitions, which we'll go over further in the presentation. But just to start off, exporting control technology to any entity, and this includes any type of entity. It could be a parent, subsidiary, affiliate, outsourcing business partner, customer, vendor, or even foreign national. So exporting control technology to any of these entities through any transfer method, either tangible or through intangible means, requires some type of export authorization. Next slide. And what is an export? So here is just the basic information to provide some kind of framework for our discussion today, and so that you have the different definitions from the Export Administration regulations. So when I discuss export in the sense of this presentation, I'm referring not only to exports, which are shipments, transmission, or release of items to a foreign country, but I'm also referring to other types of exports, which could be re-exports, in-country transfers within the same country, deemed exports or deemed re-exports. And you see the different definitions here. So under the definition of what the basic export is, you see the word items, and that really refers to either commodities, technology, or software. And in today's presentation, I'd like to focus on the technology part. Next slide. So what is technology? Technology refers to the means, information necessary for the development, production, or use, as well as any information for the operation, installation, maintenance, repair, overhaul, refurbishing of an item. And that item is considered, an item that would be controlled on the U.S. Commerce Control List. Technology may take the form of either tangible, as I mentioned before, or intangible. And here are just some of the different ways in which technology could take place. So you have all these definitions here. And one thing to highlight is it not only takes place physically when you're shipping a product or shipping technology for a product, but it could take place in an intangible form, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. Next slide. And again, the U.S. Export Administrations, they have a lot of definitions within definitions. This is where many of the times it's just difficult to follow through in the regulations. So I just want to make sure that you have the definition of everything here within the presentation for your own reference purposes. But in the definition of technology, you saw in the previous slides the words development, production, or use. So there is a definition under the U.S. regulations for each of those. And here's just for your reference purposes. Next slide. So as we mentioned, technology may take the form of, either tangible or intangible. And a lot of the technology, it could be technical data or technical assistance. You also see here the definitions for both. And this is important because if it is technical data, it could be, from a blueprint to an engineering design, through a manual or instructions, and it could be in written form or in some type of recorded medium. For technical assistance, that is mainly, when that takes place would be in intangible form. That's the know-how, that's the a form of instructions or skills training or working knowledge, or even something like consulting services. Next slide. So what is that intangible technology transfer? Intangible technology transfers, they refer to the release or transfer of the technology based on all the different definitions that we just saw from one entity to another entity through intangible means. Next slide. And this is the slide that I really wanted to get to. There's so many different ways that technology transfer could take place. It could take place through oral exchanges of information, phone conversations, video conferencing, web conferencing. So you see here a whole list of different ways that you could transfer technology. You could be in a meeting with a discussion, doing a discussion about a technical part of a product. Through a regular interaction, you could have a foreign national visiting a site, and if they go into a technical discussion, that could be considered controlled technology. Lab tours, visual inspection of technical data or even a product to a certain extent. It could be transferred through presentations, briefings, training, seminars, webinars. Just in reality, like a technical discussion or around the product, technical parameters, or the technical data for that product. The other way that technology could be transferred is referring to transmissions through electronic means. And that could cover emails, attachments, sharing files, electronic access to either, certain servers in another country or certain folders where you may have technology that is controlled, electronic downloads. So there's so many different ways in which you could have a technology transfer. Next slide. So why is this important? This is very important because multinational companies or even universities, as the previous panelists were speaking about, in this day and age, there's a lot of global collaboration. So when you have that, you may enter into a transfer of technology. If you are transferring technology based on what is considered technology based on the definitions. And if that technology is controlled, it could require a license. So collaboration with other entities located abroad, these could even be related entities and it would still be considered a transfer of technology. It could be through, outsourcing your engineering function where you still have some engineers locally, but then you're outsourcing it. So you have to share a lot of the technical know-how or technical data with the other parties abroad. Sending technical data or product specs to a sourcing team. If you're sourcing from a vendor overseas, you may need to send them technical data, and that technical data may be considered controlled. Sending technical data to vendors or customers, storing technical data or technology in servers located abroad, and then also authorizing file access to administrators or other types of uses abroad. Next slide. So with regards to once you know you could fall under this criteria, what do you need to do? And there is a process to do a license determination, and typically just at a high level, first of all, you need to understand if you are doing an export, right? So the first question is it an export? Then you would determine, is it technology based on the definitions? And if it is technology, is that technology controlled? So you basically classify the technology against a classification number, which is the ACCN, the Export Control Classification Number. After you do that determination, then you determine if you need a license to the country where you're exporting that technology to, or to the foreign national that you're exporting, or you have a deemed export to a foreign national of another country. And there in the US, we have what is called the US export. We have the Commerce Control List, and then we also have a control chart for the different countries. So we basically check against the specific country that we're sending the technology to, and we check if that country has a control for that technology in order to understand if there is a license requirement. Sometimes the technology could be controlled, but there's no specific license requirement to that country destination. Other times you do require a license, but there may be a license exception available. So the next step is to understand if there is a license exception available, if you can use the license exception based on the conditions, if you can meet the conditions, and then if you can comply with the reporting requirements of that license exception. Next slide. So in general, the types of authorizations for control technology could be one of the following, either that the product or the technology does not require a license, which is no license required. In some countries like the US, you have a license exception, which we can leverage, and that's really great. But on the other hand, if there's no license exception available, then you would need to obtain a license in order to transfer that technology. Next slide. So with regards to export license applications, the U.S. government has an interagency group that reviews U.S. license applications for technology transfers. So the application is submitted to the Department of Commerce, Bureau of Industry and Security if it's dual use products. And basically we provide a license application where the main pieces of information are, the ECCN, the classification for the technology, the end user, how they're going to use that technology, what is the purpose for their use, and also the transfer method, how that technology will be transferred. Next slide.
Veronica, we'll need you to speed up a little bit. Thanks.
Yes, so I think there's only 2 slides left. So basically the best practices, and that covers, reviewing your company's needs and implementing processes based on your company's needs. And that includes, engaging very early in the product development stages, as well as engaging with other functions like HR, engineering, and just different cross-functional teams in order to be able to implement the processes needed that could cover the technology transfers. Next slide. And just in regards to the best practices again, technology transfer processes for intercompany collaboration, that's going to be key. Technology transfer process for business partners, if you're collaborating with other business partners, for your technical documentation, wherever you store that or however you share the technical documentation, as well as, foreign visitor controls, new hire employee screening controls, where you may have deemed exports or deemed re-exports, and then employee travel, technology transfer processes, as well as IT processes, to make sure that you do have the right controls in place for wherever that technology resides within your networks. And I believe that's all the slides that I had. You have my contact information in case you have further questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Veronica. And I think Veronica's presentation gives a very good summaries on the definitions of types of exports, tangible versus intangible, particularly in terms of technology as well as software, and also the transmissions means, technical data as well as technical assistance, and finally the license determinations and application. Well, I think I would like to get all the panelists to on your video, and we shall move on to the Q&A sessions. We are slightly behind the time, but I think we still can have a couple of questions from the audience as well as from myself. Well, first of all, may I ask the questions, under what circumstances could intellectual properties or patents or trade secrets could be associated with the ITT activities? I would like the 3 panelists to address these questions. Perhaps, shall I start with Obayashi-san?
Okay, thank you for the question. So I'd like to divide the patent versus ITT and trade secrets versus ITT. So first, patent versus ITT, there is a license exemption for patent information in the public domain, or to transfer such information to make it publicly known under Foreign Exchange and Foreign Trade Act in Japan. And there may be similar exemption in many countries. However, disclosing manufacturing know-how along with licensing the relevant patent to a foreign enterprise, you may have to consider obtaining the license. So This is patent versus ITT. And the next, trade secret versus ITT. There is an overlap between trade secrets and the ITT. The manufacturing method of product may be trade secrets, and at the same time, a technology regulated by security export control. Although the product release date and the price may be very important trade secrets, however, they may be not regulated by security export control. That's from me.
Right. The KTC, do you have any comment?
Yes, when we're looking at the data and information related to a patent or patent applications, if you get the license, you can disclose, your invention or technology and data. However, with the trade secrets, we don't know what that is, right? I mean, what the companies will or the university will disclose. So, if it's, the companies and the university needs to understand what kind of information they have as a trade secret and if those information require licensing or not.
Thanks. Veronica, do you have any comment?
Yeah, so I think that the key is to first identify if that intellectual property or the trade secret is considered technology based on the regulatory definitions, and you have some of those definitions in the slides. You could have intellectual property and you could have a trade secret that's considered technology. And then if that is the case, then is it controlled technology? And if it is, then it would require an export authorization or a license.
Yeah. Well, next, I'd like to ask, how can one protect a technology and how soon they should be patented, Dr. KTC?
Well, very soon, as I mentioned before, if you want to file for patent protection in multiple countries, some countries require absolute novelty. So you want to file an application before you disclose it to the public. In the US, as I said before, we have 1 year grace period, and that would help in the US, but not in other countries.
All right. John, is there any questions that you like to read out to and address to our panelists?
Yes, thank you, George. I have the first question is, in Australia, technology transfer related to patent application and pre-publication is exempted from defense export controls. Do you think ASEAN countries should adopt similar regulations to facilitate and protect patent and IPR?
Anyone would like to take these questions?
Yeah, I will take that. In terms of IP laws, in the ASEAN region, we are promoting harmonizations, among the ASEAN member countries. So if they can harmonize in the patent or IP law in general, that would be beneficial to them as well as countries or companies that want to work or have business with them. So I would say yes.
Right, yeah. Any other questions or any comments from Veronica or Obashi-san with regards to these questions?
Just a comment in general. In the process of developing the intellectual property, you could have technology transfers. In the process of registering it, with a patent, you could have technology transfers. Once the information becomes publicly available based on the regulations, then it's no longer controlled. However, that doesn't mean that you don't have potentially other technical data that you may be sharing that could be controlled. So just another consideration.
That's right. All right, John, is there any other questions?
Yes, there's another question here, George. What is the scope of cryptocurrency / digital currency used in the international trade operations in the future?
Well, is there anyone who
That's
like to answer
a
this?
little bit outside.
I think you can Anybody, any panelists, if you can answer this question, by all means. Yeah. Any questions? I think it is beyond our session's discussion topic in terms of cryptocurrency and so on.
Yeah, I would say that was a challenging one. But George, I do have another one here.
Right.
If customs are asking for content of certain commodity that will have impact in the trade secret of a supplier, how may this be handled?
Hi, Dr. KDC, do you have any comment? Yes.
Well, there's a trade secret. We can look at the regulatory data that need to be submitted to government agencies to get approval on something. Say, for example, drugs approval, right? You have to submit the data, and the data has to be protected under the, requirement, TRIPS agreement requirement. So that kind of thing needs to be protected. So if it's a requirement that the agency has to ask for, then the agency has a duty to protect that trade secret. But again, it's very hard for if the agency doesn't have the process that educate the employees or the staff to understand that they have the duty to protect the trade secret, then it's a risky thing. So try to avoid it. If you cannot avoid it, make sure that there's a process for the agencies or regulators have the process for protection of your intellectual property.
Any more questions, John?
Yes, George, my final question that I have here in the chat is, can you share how Celestica employee identify a controlled technology so that they know that export authorization is needed before transfer?
So we have different methods that we use. We have a combination of in-house tools. We have a combination of processes that we use in order to identify when we're collaborating, because you have different types of transfers. It may be a deemed export, or it may be we're collaborating with a partner overseas, or we're collaborating with another Celestica entity overseas. So we have a combination of methods. It's not one single method. We have some tools available and processes in place in general for the different types of transfers. And we also have the IT controls, which are key.
Right. Okay, that's very important. All right. John, is there any other question? Otherwise, I will conclude one of the questions here for all the panelists. Since we are talking about IPR and trade secrets, can IPR protect these technologies from being infringed or misused for illicit purposes, or something the like, in terms of drawing their attention to take protection actions early? Veronica, you want to go first?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
Whether these IPR protect the technology from being infringed, or drawing their attentions to take protections actions early.
Yeah, I think it's good to take action early in order to detect if you are just in general with technology transfers. Take action as early as possible and understand, assess where you have needs or where you may have areas of improvement if you don't have processes in place for the different types of technology transfers. And if it's as early as possible, when you're initiating the collaboration, even within your own company and other entities overseas, that will be helpful to make things easier and identify where you have the licensing requirements.
Exactly. Obas-san?
Yes, and for the technology transfer, it is very difficult compared with the transfer of goods. Transfer of goods, there is a customs, strong gate, Japanese customs, Singapore gate customs, but there is no gate for the technology transfer. So it for the Hokkaido University, it is solely depend on the application from faculty. This is the problem. So the if the faculty send a message, important message to the foreign researchers, just sending one click button, sending button, may threat the international security. So for my project, I obtained the Takehi 2020 to 2022 by analyzing the paper automatically using the ontology, combined artificial challenge, deep learning, and expert system. And so to avoid the technology outflow in the near future, this is my dream.
Thank you. I think you take every measure to protect the technology that you develop. Yeah, I think that's a very important step. Dr. KTC, do you have any comment?
Yes, IPR registered, with the government, doesn't really completely have the 100% protection strength, because sometimes people want to misappropriate your trade secret or infringe your trademarks or patents. They will do it, but since you have the protection, then you have the cause of action, either by civil litigation or a criminal case against the infringer.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the excellent comment on the panels of these sessions. And I would like to close this session now, and I'll hand over to Dan. And thank you again, all the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Mr. Tan, for another well-moderated panel. And thank you to our panelists for another great session. I think we saw early on with the audience poll that this was an area of strategic trade controls that is a little bit less familiar. And from the questions I saw coming in, ITT and IPR are quite a challenging area to address for whatever organization you are working with, whether it's a university, a research institute, or a company. So I thought it was really important that we explored this topic. So thanks again. So that brings us to the end of the seminar. But before we conclude, we have some feedback and closing remarks from Ms. Lim Sakpung from the Singapore Customs. She's the head of the Trade Strategy and Security Branch. And we look forward to your final remarks, Ms. Lim. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to join you at the closing of the Joint Industry Outreach Seminar 2021 and honored to have the opportunity to deliver a remark on behalf of the organizers. First of all, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all the participants from not only Singapore, US, and Japan, but also from all over the world for joining this seminar. I understand that some of you, especially the delegations from US and Europe, had to log in at unearthly hours from your home countries. I hope the sharing by speakers from the various sectors and countries had brought about invaluable learning points for you. I would also like to express my sincere thanks to the government regulators, private sector representatives, and experts from the academic community who shared with us on the various topics and aspects in relation to strategic trade management. A big thank you to our core organizers from USBIS, XBIS, DOE, Japan METI, and all helpers who have made this seminar possible. Thank you all for your participation in making this seminar a success. I will now hand over back to Dan. Thank you.
So thank you, Ms. Lim, for those final remarks, and thank you to the entire Singapore Customs teams for your efforts to support the development of this event and to outreach to participants. It's truly been a pleasure working with you and your colleagues, so thank you very much. Everyone still in attendance, you'll note that there's a QR code leading to a survey from Singapore Customs on this final slide. We will also send out a survey a few days after the event to get your feedback. So please take a moment and fill these surveys out and let us know how we did and what we can improve. So to conclude, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us and providing your questions. Thank you to the panelists and moderators for sharing your expertise and time with us. And especially thank you to the organizing team. We have Mark and Nellie and Esther from Singapore Customs, I from Japanese METI, Louis and Yati from U.S. Department of State, Mike and Yvonne from the U.S. Department of Customs, and then here from the U.S. Department of Energy, we have John Castillo. And finally, I wanted to extend a very special thank you to Julie Marchand, our event producer, who did a great job making this event run smoothly. Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you, everyone. That concludes this year's JIO. Goodbye, and we hope to see you at next year's 10-year anniversary event. Thank you.